At what point is the private sector willing to pay to do what needs to be done in the region?
We have a diet of limitations, but not a sufficient discourse on our possibilities.
This is a critical step in our regional integration process.
Mistrust within countries is defeating us. It's not an economic matter, that is a matter for mindset.
West Indian people, we are a gem.
Let's advance our partnership together through the region.
Let us organize and do that together.
We need to ensure that there's transparency in what we do.
I do it because I love it. I'm passionate about watching things grow.
If there's a will, you will find a way to make it happen.
Good morning once again, and thanks for your patience. On behalf of the Board of Directors, Executive Director, Management Team, and staff of Caribbean Export, it is my deep pleasure to welcome you to this, our first regional export colloquium, and which kicks off today and runs through the next 2 days here in Barbados. For this opening ceremony, I would like to now turn the podium over to our Executive Director, Mrs. Pamela Coke Hamilton. Mrs. Coke.
Welcome to the first Caribbean Exporters Colloquium, convened as part of the inaugural Caribbean Export Week of Activities 2013. We're extremely pleased at the cross-section of distinguished panelists and representatives that we have been able to assemble here today. We hope that this reflects and is directly commensurate with the level of interest in and passion for the issues to be discussed and debated over the next 2 days. If we were to take a snapshot of the Caribbean region's export performance and economic status today, the picture would portray an extremely bleak landscape, representing the most difficult economic reality facing our region in our post-independent history. The effects of the world financial crisis have been devastating and have catapulted our economies into a virtual tailspin, which we are still struggling to understand. But I would like to suggest that our problems did not begin with the financial crisis, but rather with a systemic weakness in the Caribbean's ability and perhaps willingness to adjust to the rapidly changing global environment. In 1992, the date when the commissioner submitted the report of the West India Commission, A Time for Action, to the heads of government, fulfilling a mandate emanating from the visionary Grand Dance meetings of 1989, and my first heads of government, by the way, as a junior Foreign Service officer serving with the Honorable David Corr of blessed memory. The first inkling of what was to come was launched thousands of miles away in what was then known as the GATT. The very first panel to challenge the banana regime providing preferential access to the EU market for Caribbean banana producers was requested and established. The visionaries behind the crafting of the Grand Dance Declaration, some of whom are sitting here with us today, were prescient enough to realize that the world was changing and that the region needed to move rapidly towards the creation of a single market and economy that would help to buttress the foundations to face the storms ahead. The region, however, seemed to take comfort in the fact that the rules governing the dispute settlement process under the GATT at the time provided that any country or delegation could block the adoption of a panel report and render its findings immaterial. I was also a young officer posted there at the time. See, I'm keeping up the young thing. So the signing of the Uruguay Round Agreement in 1994, however, forever changed the international trading rules and introduced what has commonly become known as the single undertaking. This change in the rules also changed the rules governing the dispute settlement system, which now provided that once the request for the adoption of the findings of a panel report was submitted for the second time, it was automatically adopted and could no longer be blocked by one member of the WTO. I think we all know what the impact of that decision has been on the banana industry of the region and the deleterious repercussions, particularly for our most fragile member states of the OECS. I keep wondering if perhaps things would have been different had we moved on the recommendations made by the commissioners to solidify our institutional capacity and representational strength. Since the production of this report 20 years ago, the Caribbean has engaged in the negotiation and conclusion of several bilateral, partial scope, and multilateral trading agreements, most recently signing off on the EU CARIFORUM Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, in 2008. The requirement for reciprocity is now non-negotiable, and the concept of special and differential treatment and proportionality no longer receive the sympathetic hearing that it once did. Most of our economies are now considered high-income or upper-middle-income countries by the Bretton Woods institutions, and some have been graduated from receiving concessionary loans or grants as a result of their stellar performance. The latest salvo has been the move towards what is euphemistically being called differentiation by the EU in determining the future of the policy guiding development cooperation for the Union. For the Caribbean region, it is similar to assisted suicide being called euthanasia. This, coupled with the fact that 5 years after signing the EPA, the majority of our member states have failed to make any inroads in penetrating the EU market or utilizing the increased market opening provided, raises a question that Caribbean Export would like to have answered over the next 2 days. I know it's ambitious, but we're known for that. The region, having enjoyed unparalleled access to the most developed markets of the world for over 4 decades, has not been able to utilize this access to transform our economies and increase our trade performance. In fact, the very opposite is true. The Caribbean Export Development Agency was established in 1996 as a successor to the Caribbean Export Development Project and funded by the EU. The mandate for the agency at the time was directly tied to the vision of exploring non-traditional areas for export and strengthening the region's export capacity, particularly intra-regional trade. The agency has had a checkered history over the last 17 years, mostly related to the peaks and troughs in funding cycles and the lack of stability and continuity occasioned by this reality. Our mandate has now been extended to include investment and most recently financial services, and perhaps as issues evolve, increase private sector advocacy. Perhaps one of the most startling developments has been the disappearance of any regional private sector voice that can effectively represent the concerns of the regional private sector and represents a gaping hole in the negotiating framework. We believe that this hole needs to be plugged, and as such, Caribbean Export has sought to convene a private sector advisory group with the specific objective of hearing directly from the private sector of the region what the key challenges affecting export capacity and market penetration would be. We believe that this conversation will assist us in creating a more targeted approach to enabling the private sector to increase market penetration, particularly under the EPA. There's little doubt that the opportunities are abundant. However, it is hard to scoop water out of a sinking boat with a spoon. How can we improve the tools and capacity of the regional private sector firms? What should be our focus? What are the priority areas for intervention? How can we achieve maximum impact in minimum time? These are the questions that we would like to address over the next 2 days. This is not another talk shop. We don't have time. We need to emerge with a clear direction for our private sector, and it is our hope that we can at least have an action plan or roadmap that will take us there. We are ready to run, just ensure that it is in the right direction. Once again, delegates, thank you for coming, and I trust we will have a productive 2 days and will establish a platform for increased competitiveness and economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Coke-Hamilton. I'd now like to call on Dr. Rainer Engels, the Executive Project Manager for GIZ, or Deutsche Gesellschaft International. I don't know how to pronounce the other one, so I won't even try. Dr. Engels.
I would like to welcome you to the Caribbean Exporters Colloquium on behalf of GIZ, which is the German Society for International Cooperation. It's the German implementing agency for German development cooperation. As we are only a financing partner, I will be very short. I manage a project on EPA implementation, and our partners are the Caribbean Export Development Agency and the EPA implementation unit of the CARIFORUM. The implementation of the EPA should serve the economy and the overall society, and therefore I am looking forward to your discussions on advocacy, on the statistics, on experiences of the private sector, and on a new framework. This colloquium is of course broader than looking at the EPA, and it will look back in history. It will deal with regional economic integration and with other relations to economies in the region. This is all meant to give the exporters of the region, government representatives, and stakeholders a place for discussion. And I wish us a fruitful and lively discussion and some room also to go for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Engels. That took almost as long as it took me to walk back up here to introduce you. So, very well. I would like to now call on our Director General for CARIFORUM, Mr. Ivan Ogando Lora. Mr. Lora.
I wish to record the sincere thanks of the CARIFORUM Directorate for the invitation extended by Caribbean Export Development Agency to attend this event. Over the next 2 days, a select group of experts will focus attention on the challenges of the Caribbean regional integration and the region's efforts to successfully pursue export-led growth, both in goods and services, as a dynamic catalyst for economic growth and sustainable development of its member states. The fact is that regional leaders have historically set their minds to deepening and enhancing regional integration and cooperation, though the process has today been uneven. It was against this backdrop that the West Indies Commission rendered its report to the Conference of Heads of Governments of the Caribbean Community in October 1992 in Port Spain. The recommendation of the report could be summarized in its title: it was time for action. As we are all aware, this report, which is deemed to be a landmark piece of work, set a number of recommendations aimed at strengthening the process of integration and cooperation in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, more than 2 decades have passed since the West Indies Commission published its report, but our region still faces fundamental challenges to achieving sustainable development through its regional integration and cooperation initiative. From the perspective of export trade, the region's trade in traditional goods has been under severe challenges, especially over the last decade, with arrangements for preferential access to markets in sugar, bananas, and rum being considerably reduced and in some cases eliminated. The trade diversification process has been limited. The public sector financial challenges include high levels of public debt in many Caribbean countries. Foreign direct investment have been declining and concentrated by and large in a few sectors. Tourism receipts are still recovering from the effects of the recent global economic and financial crisis. From the perspective of social issues, transnational crime, particularly drug smuggling, money laundering, and illegal trade in arms, continues to impact negatively on CARIFORUM states with a detrimental effect on the long-term prospects for growth, stability, and foreign investment. It is also contributing to outward immigration and loss of skill. We have also witnessed an increase of the environmental vulnerabilities in the Caribbean, which include natural disasters, deforestation, and rising sea levels leading to flooding, which have significant impact on the economic activities of the region. Ladies and gentlemen, many things have changed in both regional and global landscapes since the report of the West Indies Commission was rendered. However, given the economic and geographical configuration of the Caribbean, the truth of the matter remains that all the challenges mentioned above can be better addressed and overcome through a more committed and effective regional integration and cooperation processes, just as the West Indies Commission report suggested more than 2 decades ago. Conventional economic development theory and experience show that sustainable development and meaningful participation in the global economy is best achieved through regional integration and cooperation mechanisms. These aspects have been and is still recognized and reflected in the context of the Caribbean Integration and Cooperation Agenda derived from regional and extra-regional initiatives and agreements established during the last 2 decades. One of the most ambitious and certainly among the most recent attempts at promoting our regional integration processes remains the CARIFORUM EU Economic Partnership Agreement. This agreement represents for most CARIFORUM states the first reciprocal trade agreement with development country partners, but also constitutes a tool which builds on and reinforces regional integration and cooperation in the Caribbean by means of market building. I think it is only fitting at this juncture to call attention to the outstanding contribution of Ambassador Henry Gill, who recently passed away, to the negotiation of this agreement. I think it's fair to say that with Ambassador Gill's passing, the Caribbean has lost a key architect of the CARIFORUM EU EPA and a tireless advocate for regional integration and cooperation. While the EPA is not a perfect agreement, it has been recognized as an example of North-South trade relation. A regional EPA implementation unit was established in the CARICOM Secretariat to facilitate with respect to the implementation of the agreement, which, as you know, has been provisionally applied since December 2008. This implementation unit has been providing technical guidance to CARIFORUM states in the implementation provisions of the EPA. There are also other institutional players involved in EPA implementation. In this regard, Caribbean Export, as a CARIFORUM institution, has a pivotal role aimed at enabling the region's private sector to improve their capacity to harness the EPA. Unfortunately, despite the above, looking at the first years since the signing of the EPA, the efforts made by CARIFORUM states in honoring their commitments under the agreement and reaping the potential benefits have proven to be more difficult than was perhaps first expected. This can be attributed to several factors, which I'm sure will be highlighted in the deliberations that are to unfold over the next 2 days. In any case, the bottom line is that much remains to be done, not only within the framework of the EPA implementation, but also in other regional trade schemes and integration scheme currently in place in the region in order to make for a successful integration to the world economy. In this regard, greater efforts must be made to address supply side constraints, transportation limitation, design and implementing competitiveness and innovation strategies, and reinforce private sector development, to name but a few. Ladies and gentlemen, there are, as has been noted, formidable challenges preventing Caribbean countries from capitalizing on the regional integration process. But as the West Indies Commission has reminded us, and I quote, if there is one undeniable truth deriving from the total Caribbean historical experience, it is that whatever the task, we do it better if we do it together. Over the next 2 days, we will therefore re-examine the relevance and applicability of the recommendation of the seminal report of the West Indies Commission on regional integration and cooperation, and reprise the conversation on export-led growth. Mechanisms that can be adopted by the region to increase exports and achieve deeper market penetration in both traditional and non-traditional markets will be explored. Moreover, I hope that the results of the discussions in this colloquium will serve as an input to assist regional leaders in designing and implementing effective policies, strategies, and mechanisms for developing export diversification, niche marketing, product innovation, and to provide a platform for the private sector to achieve sustainable export success in the context of challenges and opportunities associated with the contemporary world economy. Finally, I wish to congratulate Caribbean Export and particularly Pamela Cook-Hamilton for this excellent initiative. I thank you, and I hope that the deliberation will be a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG Laura. It's interesting because when I arrived at Caribbean Export about a year and a half ago as a very young man, I was invited by my good friend from the BACSI to give a presentation to an event they were having at the Marriott. And I found myself waxing on about something about value chain and stuff, and I thought to myself, damn, I must have spoken a lot of nonsense because I don't think anybody here understands what I'm saying. But then I had the utter privilege of having the Honorable Maxine McLean come up to the podium after I gave a presentation and said, I agree with what he said. I think it makes a lot of sense. And she's been my favorite minister since that time. So I understood at that point that there will be times when I'm here in Caribbean Export and I talk a lot of nonsense, but there will be some things that will be validated by people who it's being validated from. Minister McLean, let me be one of the first to congratulate you on your reappointment and re-election, and let me graciously welcome you to the podium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and you did indeed make sense. If I had put on my other hat as a lecturer, I might have given you a grade. Let me first offer you best wishes of Prime Minister, the Honorable Frundle Stewart, who is unable to be with you this morning as the House of Assembly is in session in the annual estimates debate. I am delighted to address you today at this colloquium during the inaugural Caribbean Export Week. Let me also welcome you to Barbados, and a special welcome to anyone who may be visiting Barbados for the first time. This week highlights the importance of trade to our regional development and recognizes the sterling contribution of the Caribbean Export Development Agency to this region, and the agency must be commended for this initiative. In surveying the audience, I am truly heartened to see the excellent mix of trade and business practitioners gathered here. This colloquium, however, is intended to be more, as you heard, than a cursory discussion on trade. It is a deliberate and concentrated effort of the Caribbean region to chart a path towards greater economic development to the benefit of all of us. This is a critical step in our regional integration process. It is widely known that as a group of primarily small states, we are hampered not only by size, but by our vulnerabilities and openness to external shocks. In the Caribbean, our geographical location also presents a major challenge as we strive to successfully penetrate other markets. To counteract these perceived weaknesses, we have pursued national objectives on an individual basis, which we believe have served us well in the past. However, the time has come for us to accept that we must pursue this matter on a collective basis as well in order to advance individual levels of development. Our leaders of government, business, and civil society must cooperate more closely to develop a regional strategy for economic development. This strategy must recognize our various national strengths and utilize them for the benefit of the majority. At the same time, we must continue to mitigate our national weaknesses in order that the region can go forward in a unified manner. I must say that this strategy is timely as the global market is continually evolving. To put it into context, the forces of globalization are still at the forefront of trade. The navigation of the protracted global financial and economic crisis continues to present challenges for growth prospects, but I must agree with Ms. Coke-Hamilton that our challenges didn't start with that. We have to address very much the situation of our endemic structural weaknesses. All the while, many of us are facing the possibility of graduation from some of our key development partners. As governments, we have an obligation to provide the appropriate enabling environment which would allow our regional businesses to prosper. We must pay even closer attention to the role of business and trade facilitation and recognize the value of the creation of efficient processes at all levels of production and export. Regional governments have traditionally sought to establish an environment where our traders can have access to lucrative regional and international markets and trade successfully. At the CARICOM level, we have signed agreements with Venezuela, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Costa Rica, for example. And these must be taken full advantage of. The region is also in the process, as you know, of negotiating a trade and development agreement with Canada. At the CARIFORUM level, the region has an agreement among ourselves and has negotiated the Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, and we just heard of the status of that. Of course, we know that it gives us duty-free access to the markets of all 27 countries of the European Union for both goods and services. Notwithstanding this, we must also explore opportunities for increasing exports to new and emerging markets. The business community must take up the charge to capitalize on the opportunities which our efforts have created. It is not going to be an easy task, as we know. However, governments have sought to do it, but ultimately it is going to be the task to be undertaken by the private sector. We are no longer operating in a national environment, obviously. We now have regional and international conglomerates operating in our various jurisdictions. There's therefore little place for inefficiency in this global economy. Marginalization of those who are unable to compete is the new reality. We must develop an export or die mentality. We can no longer sustain our increasing import bills across the region. Our business persons must therefore counter this by being innovative in their thinking, and they must recognize, among other things, the critical importance of research and development as we strive to maintain competitiveness and break into the markets previously described. The focus must be on efficient production, processes, and productivity. In spite of our small size, we can contribute to the area of premium quality goods and services consumed internationally. One critical area which must be addressed is the issue of diversifying our production base. For too long, we have been exporting the same traditional goods and services to the same markets. This, however, is not a cue for us to resign ourselves to defeat. There is a need, of course, for us to take positive action. We must continue to create an environment that is entrepreneurial, which would harness the intellectual capacity of our people, perhaps one of the greatest resources of the region. And critically, an element of that is our youth, who must be accommodated. In essence, we must unlock the creative energies of the entire region. There does, however, remain an imbalance in the levels of development across the region. We acknowledge that as a people, we have not taken the necessary steps to fully foster a regional economic growth trajectory for all countries. This colloquium, then, is an opportunity for us to address the situation and focus on enhancing our relationships. It is known to all of us, but perhaps not appreciated fully, that the region is rich in resources, and more importantly, our people, or should I say most importantly, our people. As some of the region's brightest minds come together over the next 2 days, I expect that we will begin to forge an action plan, the first steps in a new regional export strategy that will transcend all the various national interests and place the region on a path towards not only export-led growth, but growth-led exports. I challenge you to adopt this tripartite approach, which has worked well in Barbados. This is a model for cooperation among the various stakeholders who have and can make a valuable contribution. Our collaboration at the level of government, trade unions representing workers, of course, and the private sector is very well known. It has worked for us, particularly in these difficult times. And therefore, I wish you an engaging and fruitful dialogue which will provide us with the base for a truly regional work plan for the future. I also want to remind you that this exercise is of signal importance. Governments facilitate. However, it is the private sector players who are the ultimate beneficiaries of efforts to improve our regional exports, and the persons who have to take charge and facilitate and achieve what is intended. We are talking, as it says here, about promoting regional trade, export, development, and investment. Again, I wish you well. I am hoping to be able to participate in some of your sessions, and I will do so as time and other engagements permit. Welcome again to Barbados for those who are visiting, and may you have a successful 2 days of deliberations and decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, the Honorable Maxine McLean. And I do agree that it's an undertaking that needs to be revisited. It's a time for action, and I believe that from Caribbean Export we've assembled a distinguished set of speakers and persons from across the region to help guide us in that process and dialogue. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of the opening session for this colloquium.